Before the first human breath touched the dust of the earth, before Adam opened his eyes in the midst of Eden, there was already something. We're not talking about chaos or emptiness, but about a finished work, a garden perfectly planted, defined, and functional. Genesis 2:8 tells us, "And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put the man he had formed." But what many don't notice is the order of events. First, the garden is planted, then man is formed, and finally, he is placed there. This sequence, seemingly simple, hides a time gap, an invisible interval between the planting of Eden and Adam's arrival. And in that gap, an uncomfortable question arises. Who was tending the garden? Eden was not a wild wasteland or an ungoverned field. It was a place of structured beauty with defined rivers, all kinds of trees, including the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and a clear distinction between what was allowed and what was forbidden. This implies that law already existed before humanity. But to whom was the task of maintaining that order given? Can we really believe that after creating such a sacred space, God simply left it unattended until Adam was ready? That omission in itself is a revealing crack. The Bible remains silent. But its silence is not empty, it is eloquent. It's the kind of silence that leaves room for the questions few dare to ask. Some might think that there was no need for a caretaker, that Eden sustained itself. However, other ancient texts, excluded from the canon but preserved in the memory of certain traditions, speak of an earlier presence, a being that was neither human nor angel, but something in between, an entity tailor-made to guard the most sacred place until the time came to pass on the torch. The Book of the Caverns, an ancient work of Egyptian Jewish origin, and the Apocalypse of Moses, a text attributed to an early tradition, speak of guardians stationed at the edges of Eden from time immemorial. These beings of light prevented fallen spiritual forces from invading the space reserved for divine creation. They were not mere sentinels, they were conscious intelligences, wise, with access to cosmic secrets, and one of them stood out above the rest. He was known as the Guardian of Perfection, the first inhabitant of the garden, the first witness of paradise. This guardian knew every root, every water current, every vibration of Eden. He wasn't there by accident, but by purpose. While man had not yet been formed, he kept watch. He knew the garden not only as a space, but as a promise, an intersection between the divine and the earthly. Why then is he not mentioned in Scripture? Why was his name erased from the account? And why, instead, are we only given the image of Adam and Eve waking up in a place already fully functional? The answer may be as powerful as it is disturbing. Because to remember, the guardian is to remember that the story began before us. That humanity was not the starting point, but the continuation of something greater. Eden was not invented for man. It was a hall already prepared, a cosmic temple we were allowed to enter. But we were not the first to walk its paths. Someone did before us. And their story, for some reason, was erased from the official account, not because it was irrelevant, but perhaps because it contained a secret not yet meant to be revealed. Today, thousands of years later, that void remains open. And while Genesis begins for us on the day Adam is formed, perhaps for God the story had begun much earlier, when there was still no human voice to name what was created, but there were ancient eyes watching, understanding, and guarding. The guardian of perfection was one of those eyes, the first to see paradise, and perhaps also the first to lose it. Deep within the Hebrew oral tradition and texts considered apocryphal by dominant religious institutions, there is mention of a being that doesn't fit into any known category. He was not a man, because man did not yet exist. He was not an angel, because his actions and structure appeared different. He was not one of the Watchers, those fallen angels mentioned in the Book of Enoch, because this being never fell. But neither was he glorified. He was separated, isolated, guarded, as though his very existence was too great a secret to remain in plain sight. The texts that mention him are fragmentary, scattered, broken like pieces of an ancient mirror. But when assembled carefully, they reveal something astonishing: the existence of a being created exclusively to guard Eden before mankind. His title was no coincidence. He was called the Guardian of Perfection, and that perfection referred not only to the physical state of the garden, but also to its spiritual condition. Eden was not just nature, it was revelation. It was the first sanctuary, the place where God's design was manifested without corruption, without a veil, without time. This guardian knew everything, not only the location of each tree, each fruit, each stream of water, but also the hidden meanings behind them. He knew which river carried wisdom and which one held the memory of heaven. He knew the invisible portals of the garden, the points where the eternal touched the earthly. He was not Eden itself, but he was part of its essence. He was created from the same breath that formed the garden's foundations, a spark from before human time. Ezekiel 28 holds a clue that has puzzled scholars for centuries. Although the passage is addressed to the king of Tyre, it soon takes an unusual turn. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adorned you. You were anointed as a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. What human king could this possibly describe? What man ever lived in Eden? The most discerning commentators have reached an inescapable conclusion. This refers to a spiritual entity, not a human being. Many identify this figure as Lucifer before his fall, and though that is a possibility, there's something more. The passage doesn't speak of pride as the cause of expulsion, but rather of iniquity found in you, with no direct explanation. What if the guardian's fall was not rebellion, but a more subtle transgression? What if his sin was not acting against God, but seeing what was not meant to be seen? Not in the sense of disobedience, but of excessive perception. A boundary crossed not through arrogance, but through revelation. Some Gnostic texts and Kabbalistic traditions suggest that the guardian saw something hidden in the core of Eden. Not an object, but a truth, a code, a secret, a glimpse of the eternal plan that was not yet meant to be revealed. In his loyalty, perhaps he tried to warn, to share, to prepare the other celestial beings. But he was silenced. His knowledge was considered a risk, and then, in an act more like containment than punishment, he was removed. Not destroyed, not cursed, just set apart, as if placed somewhere his knowledge could not alter God's appointed times. That removal was final. From then on, when the watch over Eden is mentioned after Adam's fall, his figure is gone. Genesis 3:24 speaks of cherubim placed at the east of Eden, along with a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the path to the tree of life. Note the detail. No longer one, but many. No longer contemplation, but defense. No longer communion, but barrier. Watchfulness became militarized. Access was sealed. Who then was the first? The one who guarded before danger existed? The one who understood more than he enforced? If that was the original guardian, his role no longer fit in a fallen world. He belonged to the time before. A witness of perfection. Certain rabbinic legends tell of a being whose light could not be contained in words, who was the first to walk the garden without fear. It is said he did not speak because he had no need, that he did not eat because he knew no hunger, and that he wept on the day man was formed, not out of jealousy, but compassion. He knew man would be fragile, curious, reckless, and he knew Eden was not built to last under such conditions. He did not despise man, but he understood him too well. Today, as we look back and try to piece together the puzzle of origins, this being emerges as an absent but decisive figure, not as the protagonist of rebellion, but as a sentinel of mystery. The guardian of perfection was not a mistake. He was a sacred parenthesis, a whisper amid the thunder of human history. And if he still exists, he waits, in silence, watching, because what he once protected has not yet been fully revealed. The disappearance of Eden's first guardian was not an act of oblivion, nor a catastrophic fall like that of other celestial beings. It was rather a silent operation, a deliberate divine maneuver, as if his removal had been part of a greater plan, a protection not just for man, but for something man was not yet ready to endure. And here begins one of the most unsettling aspects of this story. What exactly did the guardian see? What truth transformed him? What knowledge crossed the boundaries of what even a being of light was permitted to grasp? The clues are scattered. Ancient texts and esoteric Hebrew traditions suggest that at the very center of the garden, there was not only the tree of life, but something else. A sacred core, a point where time and eternity touched. A kind of living archive of the complete plan of creation. It wasn't a physical book, nor a built structure, but a spiritual space where what the scriptures would later call the sod resided. The deep secret of God. This sod was not merely a revealing fact. It was the full map of the divine purpose. The reason for creation, the final destiny of the worlds, the true nature of the human soul, the role of each celestial creature, and most astonishing of all, the final outcome of universal history. All of this enclosed in a single point, encoded in a language only the oldest beings could understand. And the guardian saw it. It was not a direct disobedience. He didn't take the fruit. He didn't defy God with words. He simply crossed the threshold of knowledge, not out of pride, but out of love for truth. Perhaps he thought he needed to know in order to better protect Eden. Or maybe it was a spark of innocent curiosity that unintentionally carried him beyond the permitted boundary. At that moment, everything changed. The oldest records, such as fragments of the Apocalypse of Moses and some Aramaic versions of the Book of Jubilees, suggest that the guardian glimpsed a moment in the future. Not just the birth of man, but his fall, his redemption, his final return to paradise, and the ultimate judgment of the cosmos. He saw the centuries collapse and be rebuilt. He saw blood, betrayal, pain, and glory. He saw the Lamb slain before the foundation of the world, and that knowledge, that eternal flash, marked him forever. But the divine plan had a temporal structure. Humanity was not yet ready to know everything. Free will required mystery, and mystery required distance. A truth revealed before its time could destroy. That is why the guardian's existence and his vision became a risk. He was removed. Not executed, not cursed, simply set apart, like a book put away that is not yet to be read. It was then that a new system of watch was instituted. No longer was understanding required, but obedience. No longer was wisdom needed, but containment. That's why the new guardians of the garden were armed cherubim, with flaming swords, turning constantly. They did not dialogue. They did not reflect. They guarded. The original guardian does not reappear. He is not mentioned in genealogies. He has no spiritual offspring. He left no monuments or prophecies. But his trace remains in the gaps of the story, in the unexplained silences of Genesis, in the lack of an answer to a simple question: who watched over the garden before Adam? Some modern commentators believe what the guardian saw was, in essence, the division between worlds. Eden, as the intersection between the eternal and the created, contained doors to other realities, doors that would later be shut. He witnessed the closing. He witnessed the cosmic exile. And for that reason, he could no longer remain at his post. In that act of forbidden vision, the guardian did not become an enemy, but a living relic, a creature marked by what he knew, unable to speak of it, and who still waits somewhere in an unknown region of the spiritual plane, for the day that the secret may be revealed without destroying the world. This is the true secret of the garden, not the fruit, not the serpent, not the punishment, but what was seen in silence, in the center of perfection, by a being who was not destined to fall, but who was removed to protect all others. And if this story is true, if the figure of the guardian is more than allegory, then his presence still weighs upon the spiritual history of humanity, because what he saw has yet to be revealed, and his silence still resounds. After the original guardian was removed, Eden was never the same. Its atmosphere changed. Where there had once been contemplation, there was now defense. Where there had once been protective wisdom, there were now strict orders. It marked the beginning of a new regime of vigilance, one no longer based on understanding the divine plan, but on enforcing its boundaries. The garden ceased to be a sanctuary and became a fortress. Genesis, in its sober narrative, drops a phrase that holds centuries of mystery. So he drove out the man, And he placed cherubim at the east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. Genesis 3:24. This image is not allegorical. It's a description of a radical change in Eden's spiritual administration. Before, there was a single spiritual custodian, contemplative, profound. Afterward, there were armed celestial forces that did not converse, did not reason. They blocked access. Why this shift? Why go from a singular figure of wisdom to a rotating guard with flaming weapons? Because something had already been seen, and what was seen had to be protected at all costs. The cherubim mentioned in the Bible are not the sweet little angels popular imagery portrays. In biblical and apocalyptic tradition, cherubim are imposing beings with multiple faces, interwoven wings, and a very specific function: to guard glory and sacred boundaries. They are beings who protect, not teach, who deny entry, not guide the seeker. The transition from a contemplative guardian to militarized custodians is clear evidence that Eden had entered a state of celestial emergency. This raises an uncomfortable question. How dangerous had access to Eden become? What was truly feared? That man would return? Or that other beings, perhaps older ones, might exploit the breach? The truth is, Eden was no longer an open garden, but a sealed bastion. The tree of life, the very one whose fruit could grant immortality, was now under an impenetrable guard, and that guard wielded swords. Scholars who dare to approach this passage from a more mystical or cosmological perspective agree that this sword is not just a weapon. The Bible says it turned every way. What does this mean? A circular motion? A protective energy? Some rabbinic texts suggest that this sword represented the boundary between dimensions, a living line of fire, a kind of energetic seal that prevented any attempt to intrude upon the sacred core of Eden. And here emerges a detail both poetic and unsettling. The intensification of Eden's guard did not result from man's fall, but from the guardian's departure. Man was placed in the garden with limitations already in place. The tree of knowledge was already a test, but when the guardian was removed, after having seen what was not meant to be seen, everything changed. Eden was no longer merely a place where God's ways were taught, but a place that hid a mystery too great to entrust to fallen man. Since then, every attempt to return to Eden has been symbolically blocked. No matter how much theology, liturgy, or philosophy has flourished over the centuries, no one has accessed the heart of the garden again. Why? Because the new guardians respond neither to knowledge nor to human merit, but to a direct instruction from the Most High. Guard the way, nothing more, nothing less. In this context, some scholars point out a key difference between the ancient guardian and the current cherubim. The original guardian knew Eden's secrets. He understood what he guarded. He had an almost organic relationship with the garden. The new guardians do not know. They only obey. They are border agents, not bearers of wisdom. Their power is absolute, but their understanding is limited. They do not question, interpret, or remember. This change is, in itself, a spiritual tragedy. It marks the moment humanity was disconnected from direct access to original truth. Since then, all religions, prophets, and sages have worked with fragments, with echoes and glimpses, but the core remains sealed. And so, the inevitable question arises. Can this barrier be lifted? Can the guardian return? Can wisdom once again take the place of armed vigilance? Some apocryphal texts, like the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, suggest yes, that the time of fire will end, that a day will come when the garden will reopen, that the sword will extinguish, and that a new type of access will be granted, not through human merit, but through divine restoration. On that day, they say, the first guardian will be awakened, not as an angel, not as a glorified being, but as the oldest witness of God's purpose, ready to speak of what he saw, without being destroyed by it. If the guardian of Eden was truly removed before the fall of man, one inevitable question arises: where is he now? The Bible remains silent. The prophets do not mention him. Jesus does not name him. But his absence echoes powerfully. It is as if someone carefully wiped away the traces of his presence, erased his name from the heavenly records, and cloaked his fate in silence. Yet the oldest traditions, those that survive in the margins of orthodoxy, suggest that his story did not end with expulsion. It was merely hidden from human view. Some sages of ancient Hebrew mysticism believed that certain beings were not destroyed, but withdrawn. The term they used was nistar, which does not mean annihilated, but hidden from sight. According to these teachings, there are beings whose role was so close to the divine mystery that their continued visibility would be too disruptive for fallen humanity. Thus, rather than being judged or transformed, they were put on hold, not condemned nor glorified, simply hidden, preserved outside of time. In this category fits the guardian of Eden. He was not defeated, not corrupted, not executed. He was suspended, withdrawn, disconnected from the earthly plane. But where would such a being be taken? Apocryphal accounts point to regions beyond our comprehension, intermediate spaces between heaven and earth. Not hell, not paradise, but what we might call a waiting plane. The Apocalypse of Baruch, one of the texts deemed peripheral by ecclesiastical councils, speaks of a place known as the shadow of the mountain, a timeless realm where God has preserved the witnesses of his purpose. Some researchers associate this image with the guardian's destiny. There, they say, he dwells in silence. He does not sleep, but he does not act. He was not forgotten, but silenced. He is not dead, yet he does not live as we understand it. Moreover, certain Eastern Christian legends, especially among Ethiopian and Syrian monks, hold that the guardian still protects something. Not the physical Eden, but its spiritual reflection. The true garden, the one hidden on high, as hinted at in 2 Corinthians 12:2, when Paul speaks of being caught up to the third heaven. Some texts link that third heaven to the unfallen Eden, the original, not yet tainted by human history. If so, then the guardian never abandoned his task. He was simply transferred to a new version of paradise, invisible to us, but as real as the air we breathe. According to even more cryptic texts, like the Book of the Secrets of Adam, the guardian would have another function during his withdrawal: to guard not only the garden, but a truth, a piece of the divine design that has yet to be revealed. This theory claims that his removal was not a punishment, but a strategy. God did not expel him as a rebel, but protected him from being corrupted by what was to come. He placed him where he could wait for the fulfillment of time. This idea resonates strongly in writings like 4 Ezra, where it is said that certain beings will be revealed at the end of times to testify of the beginning. What if the guardian is one of those witnesses? What if, when final restoration comes, his voice will be the first to speak? Not as a mythic figure, but as the living conscience that witnessed what no one else did. The moment when creation was sealed and God's plan was sown into the heart of Eden. We may never know his name. His face may remain hidden until the last seal is open. But even in his silence, the guardian leaves behind a trace. The certainty that there was a purpose before sin, an order before chaos, and that someone, even today, continues to guard that memory. Not to judge, not to condemn, but so that when the time comes, we may finally understand where we come from and to where eternity calls us.